Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Hello, London. That was my pop star moment. So I just want to make sure I'm in the right room. Has anybody in recent times had any kind of dark or difficult thoughts about the future of your country or the world? Has anyone ever looked at the people that you've actually chosen to live with and thought, oh my God, you again? Has anyone like me ever found themselves employed by the Prince of Darkness? Okay. You are my people. So, years ago, I was in the middle of a divorce, and as part of my journey into a new normal, I decided I would learn to road bike, like Tour de France bike kind of thing. And there's a hill in my town that the first 3 times I tried to ride the hill with my guy, he got up easily and I couldn't get up. So one morning I decided I'm going to do this hill by myself because maybe the pressure of doing it in front of my boyfriend was making it hard for me. So I get up early, very early one morning, and I take a 7-mile ride to get warmed up, and I hit the bottom of the hill. It's quite a long hill, and I get to the bottom of the hill, and I'm really ready to go. And I glance over to the other side of the road, and I see a chipmunk, and her right paw is pinned to the ground, and she is almost bent over in prayer, trying to lift her paw up. And as I recognize what is happening, I see the car come down the hill. And it is her last moment in our world. And because of her, and because of her dying, suddenly this determination to go up the hill became incredibly significant. And every stroke of the pedal became important. Every crack on the road actually felt like it was part of the labyrinthian journey on an important quest. And I made it up the hill, holding her in mind. As I got to the top of the hill, I saw the cafe that I spend many hours in, and that suddenly became the tavern of fellowship, and the library became the hall of learning, and everything had a potency and a shimmer to it because of the recognition of what had happened. 2 weeks later, I'm on a flight to Australia, my first flight to Australia, and I live in Massachusetts, east coast of the United States, so I have to fly to LA and then take a long 19-hour flight over. And I was so proud of myself because I spent an extra $75, I don't know, is that 90 pounds or something, to buy the seat with a little extra leg room. And that the only seat that was available was in the very front row with the bulkhead in front of me. And we're packed, it's Qantas, we're packed in. There's not an extra seat in the house. We barely begin to take off. And 2 rows and 7 seats over, and yes, I counted, 2 rows and 7 seats over, a man had clearly taken sleeping medication because the second we are in the air, he is dead asleep doing this. So loudly that the steward comes over and says to the woman sitting next to him, basically, is that your guy? Because, wake him up. Because this is so, and she's like, I don't know, it's total strain. So that's going on. We're all agitated about that. Next to me, the woman next to me has also clearly taken sleeping medication because she is dead out and her head is already doing this, and there is drool coming. And on her lap is a very small book, looked to be about 50 pages long. The title of it is The Science of Revulsion. I'm thinking, who are you? And get off of my shoulder. Meanwhile, on my right side is a young mom who's had never left Australia and her children before. She was on her way back home from her first vacation in the United States, very excited to be headed back home. She just happens to be a little larger than the seat. And because we are in the bulkhead row, our tray tables are in the arm. So anytime I want to take the tray table out, either to work on my laptop or when the stewardesses bring food or whatever, I need to like move part of her to get my table. And she gets a little embarrassed, and her body makes very perky, difficult sounds. And so I'm like like this 19 hours, and her drooling and I'm in my head, just remember the chipmunk. Remember, like 2 hours. It took me 2 hours to get back to perspective on what was really important in life. Howard Zinn, one of our historians and playwrights, reminds us that we get to choose what we emphasize. That our futures are an infinite succession of present moments. Now, me on the airplane, this is one woman. It's a small, tiny moment. I mean, no one's curing cancer here, but isn't that what most of our lives are made up of, those small moments when the people you live with are yelling at you for not taking out the garbage or feeding the children wrong, or you go to work and a colleague doesn't answer your emails and you're insanely frustrated, or you feel something under here and you can't get the catastrophic thought out of your head that this could be the thing that takes you down, right? Life is a series of these small moments, and what we know about happiness in dark times is that it begins with perspective. It begins with choosing what to focus on and how we focus. So let's just make that real for a second. I'd like you to let's pretend that there's a sort of a body of water here, and this is filled with all the things that make our ordinary days, stressful. So I'd love to hear, what are the things that make your lives stressful? Just regular Tuesday or Wednesday. Trains. Money worries. Unreliable people. Brexit. I'll W Trump. What else? Losing things. Admin. Too much to do, too little time. Illness. Rude people. Technology breaks down. Bills. Okay, ex-partners over here, and what? The puppy pooing on the carpet. Yes. Yes, now we're getting really real here. Anything else? Let's just throw in here diagnosis, death, taxes, betrayal, my mother, right there. We call this the swamp. Every day has a swamp. And now imagine a different body of water here. And this body of water is filled with the things that make every day a day worth living, the things that we're grateful for. What kinds of things are you grateful for in your ordinary days? Just life itself? Friends? Nature, children? Husbands, a walk in the park? Coffee? Food? Chocolate balls, thank you so much. Sleep? Don't know what that is, but it seems to make everybody happy. Anything else? Music? Laughing? Family. How about the upper quadrant over there? Nature. Sunshine. Oh, I love that. Wood carving. Yoga. The seaside. Home. Reading, books. Friends, Bon Jovi. Gin. Red wine. There we go. Okay, we call this the pond. Every day has a pond. Every day has a swamp. Every day has a pond. And what we come to understand if we honor both, which is really what happiness in dark times is about, is honoring both the swamp and the pond. What we come to realize is that we can choose what we're focused on. And the happiest of us, The most resilient, those of us with the highest life satisfaction scores, are those who recognize the swamp, manage it, work with it, do what we can to help or heal or cure it, but we focus on the pond. We focus on that which is good within us and around us. And what do we focus on specifically? So this is the swamp, also known as hell. And this is the pond. And we focus on positive states, such as what happens to us when we're engaged in novel activities or meeting new friends or even going a new way to work. There's an uplift for many of us in experiencing the novel. We focus on passion, what enlivens us and engages, and it puts us in states of flow. We focus on generosity, the acts of being generous and the receiving of generosity and kindness from others. We focus on creativity, that which is innovative within us, that which inspires us to be makers in our own life, to make something anew, right? Wonder, that which takes our breath away. Meaning, and love in all of its forms. So happiness in dark times isn't really just about happiness or delight or that which makes us laugh. It is about these positive states. This is the territory that we're really dealing with. When in 2011 I lost my younger brother to stage 4 pancreatic cancer. He was diagnosed in December and passed 10 weeks later. He was 48. I was 50. I was his big sister. He was my baby brother. And in that short 10-week journey, through all of my training, before positive psychology emerged, I was a clinical psychologist, and my specialty was death and dying. I worked with children facing cancers and other blood diseases. So the territory of dying was very familiar to me clinically as well as personally. And along the road came this gorgeous subspecialty in psychology called positive psychology. And as those two intersections of the territory of dying well and positive psychology came together, I began to understand that there is one potent question that we can ask in the worst moments, which is, who am I at my best when the worst things happen? So happiness in dark times isn't always about delight or pleasure or laughter. It's often about the meaning that emerges when you allow yourself to be your best self or your better self. And as Johnny was dying, I was absolutely centered and focused on what it meant to love him in the way that was meaningful to him as he passed. And that brings about that kind of focus on being ourselves at our best, elevating these positive states. It brings about a few benefits for us that I'd like to share with you tonight. The first benefit that it brings is respite from our suffering. So anytime we enter a difficult or stressful day and we choose to build in moments, experiences of positivity, we're giving ourselves a bit of a break. Does that make just sense theoretically? We're giving ourselves a bit of a break. And in these micro moments of positivity, to steal a phrase from Barbara Fredrickson, we allow ourselves to be psychologically in a different frame of mind. We actually allow our neurochemistry to calm down so we're less anxious or worried or terrified or angry, less suffering, less grieving even. And we allow a kind of more natural rhythm to our emotions to occur. This is a quote from Matteo Ricard speaking about this experience of respite. For just a few moments, thoughts of the past are suppressed. The mind is not burdened with plans for the future, and the present moment is liberated from all mental construct. This moment of respite, from which all sense of emotional urgency has vanished, is experienced as one of profound peace. So if I enter a difficult time, such as the passing of my brother, consciously choosing to build in any of those positive states, like deliberately choosing to practice kindness for 5 minutes a day, or to invite myself to receive love consciously, mindfully, a few moments a day. Or choose creativity. What does it look like to be an older sister in a new way? What does that look like? What could that look like? Just even asking the question, I've put myself in the present moment. Thoughts of the past and worries about the past are quiet. Burdens of the worrying and trying to control the future are quiet, and I am simply at peace in this moment. And these moments of respite begin to sort of line up, if you will, kind of like pearls on a string. And so the experience of being in hell is not simply hell, it's hell with little dots of heaven, if you will. Does that make sense in general? So I wanted to teach you 2 very quick tools that you could use in any of the stressful times that you might be experiencing that elevate this sense of a little bit of heaven and hell, that actualize practices that create this kind of respite. So the first tool is a very simple tool I've taught for years. It's called Best Moment of the Day. You live your day, you get ready to go to sleep at night, you brush your teeth and you floss. I have a 19-year-old at home, I'm still trying to get him to floss. And you get into bed, and just before you close your eyes, you ask yourself, what was the best moment today? You don't even have to write it down. You just think about it and savor it. So let's just do this. Turn to someone new, maybe someone different than the person you talked to in Mark's exercise, and just quickly share what's been the best moment of this day today so far for you, February 13th. Make sure everyone's included. Go ahead. Best moment of the day. Well done. Thank you, light person, whoever you are. Let's just hear a few. What was the best moment of the day for you?
Sunset.
Sunset. How about for you?
Doing my yoga.
Doing your yoga? How about you, sir, with the tie?
Me?
Yes.
It was having a genuine conversation with clients who were supportive.
An actual genuine conversation with.
She actually
She actually burst
burst into tears with me.
into tears. Yes, well done. Okay. How about for you?
Not missing my train.
Not missing my train. Best moment of the day. How about in the front row there in the back? In the balcony? Any one of you?
Walk along the beach.
Walk on the beach. Excellent. And Fran, how about for you?
Waking up next to the man I love.
Waking up next to the man I love. Oh. You all have like 6 hours before it's Valentine's Day, people. Spit spot. So, if you were to practice this simple tool every night for 30 nights in a row, just simply remembering and savoring best moment of the day, here's what you would learn. Number 1, every day, no matter how dark the day, has a best moment. Every day, no matter how dark the day, has a best moment. Some days they are literally as simple as a cup of coffee. Other days they're a little bit more profound, a walk on the beach, sunsets. Some days they are extraordinary, love, connection, transformation. The day my brother died, there were 2 profound best moments, one of which you can read about in the book if you choose, about a certain kind of love showing up unexpectedly. But the other best moment was the fact that somehow intuitively, even though we had been told that he would live another week or so, that morning, all of a sudden, I knew, and I stood up in his home in the den, and my brother was in the television room with the hospice nurse, and his family was in the kitchen, and I was standing between them, and the nurse looked up suddenly, slid her fingers off of his pulse, and simply nodded. And I knew enough to know what that meant, and could call my family in so that we actually, all of us, could say goodbye to John in love, him still conscious. Every day, no matter how dark the day, has a best moment. The other thing that you would notice is because you have to do your homework at night, you will be in the day looking for best moments. Guess what happens when you're in the day looking for something in particular? You actually see them, right? They're there. We just tend not to see them, right? So you begin to notice that the days have more micro moments of positivity than you had expected, number one. Number two, you begin to enjoy your days a bit more because you see more of these pearls, if you will. And the third thing that starts to happen is it becomes part of your language, your lexicon. So you'll be doing something, your ordinary thing, like walking your children to school, or you're on the train to work, and something will happen. You'll see someone give an extraordinary hug to another person, and you'll go, oh my God, that's my best moment. And the person next to you will say, well, what the hell are you talking about? And then it becomes part of your shared language. The fourth thing that'll happen is your neurochemistry will begin to change, because anything that we practice 30 days in a row begins to establish new neuronal connections. The neurons that fire together begin to wire together, and so you start to have a brain that supports you in respite, in positivity. And the fifth thing that will happen is that anytime you practice anything like this 30 days in a row, you teach yourself that you are crafting life as opposed to being victimized or martyred into suffering in life. That you actually are actively capable of choosing, of crafting your life, even in the presence of what is harsh and stressful and worrisome. So respite. A second quick tool to practice is this one. One good thing I brought to life today. One good thing I brought to life today. So just reflect for a second for yourself. What might be one good thing you brought to our world today? Can I hear it? How about from you, one example? Yes.
I came across a person who was very worried about something she'd experienced at death in her job, and I realised that something was happening today that made her think someone else had gone missing. It's in a area. And so I noticed that she was fearful and supported her to look for where the person was.
So I noticed great fear in someone, and I supported her. I remembered her history. So it really honored her respect. It brought about a sense of respect and dignity to her history and her suffering, and supported her in her fear. And tried to alleviate it. Beautiful. And you in the pink in front of her?
I had a meeting, and it's a help group for people with similar things, and it's always so nurturing, and it feels like it's a safe space with everybody, but actually, because we don't know each other that well, it helps me to trust that it's a reflection about real life, actually.
Right. So participating in a meeting where you're helping each other, you have a shared similar concern or focus of attention, and there's something about that gathering and participating that builds trust?
Yeah, it can help have a ripple effect.
And have a positive ripple effect. Beautiful, right. I was participating, I'm a consultant to an organization in America called Leader Mom. It's for women who are leaders in their work, but also have chosen to be moms, or they're managing women who are leaders and who are choosing to be moms. And one of our executive fellows stood up and said, why is it that I take all the blame when my children get terrible grades at school, but I take none of the credit when they do well? Yeah? Anybody else ever? And it occurred to me that we do this in life in general, not just with our children, that we take a lot of the burden of the things that don't go well, but we don't often step quietly and hold on to and savor the goodness that we've helped create, right? So imagine doing that once a day for 30 days in a row. What good have I brought to the world? Now, I know we often are reticent about celebrating ourselves because we're frightened that, a focus on the good within us is just a quick, slippery slope to narcissism and self-centered. Yes? Anybody worried about that? Those of us who have the character strength of humility sometimes find this hard, right? So fair enough, just want to honor and normalize that. And we cannot know our own capacity to be resilient and bring thriving to life on behalf of ourselves and those we care for if we can't find some way to recognize the good that is within us. So I encourage you to think about practicing that as a tool as well. The second thing that is engendered when we consciously choose to move toward states of positivity has to do with hope. And the hope that I'm talking about here is not delusional Hollywood, everything's going to be fine hope, because we all know that is just caca, right? It is, what we're talking about here is, what the term in medical oncology is true hope as opposed to false hope. In positive psychology, we call it grounded optimism, right? Grounded optimism. When you consciously choose to practice those things that lift you, like generosity and kindness and love and connection, or your character strengths, or choose best moment of the day, or noticing, savoring the good that you've brought forward. Any of these practices, mindfulness, for example, any of the positive psychology-oriented practices, you are building within you a grounded hope. Not hope that everything's going to be perfect, but the hope that you will find your way through, whatever the through is, in such a way that you are bringing your better selves to the task. And does that make sense? I'll say that again. The hope that you will find your way through, in other words, well, or well enough, by bringing your better self alive. And truly, this is the hope that we're looking for when life strikes incredibly hard. When Jeanette Mare, she's a mom from a state in the United States, Arizona, had a little baby boy. He was growing normally, naturally, 3 years old. He developed a coughing disease called croup. Is that a familiar term here? But croup, most kids do fine with croup. It's nothing we terribly worry about. But there are children who, for some reason, cannot clear their lungs when they are diagnosed with croup. And he died in the middle of the night, one night. And Jeanette fell apart, of course, and shattered. Her life shattered, her sense of purpose in life shattered, and her capacity disappeared. And then one day, she was driving to an appointment that she had to go to, and she got out of her car and dropped her keys. And as she bent down to pick up her keys, a stranger had come by and bent down to pick up the keys also, and he got there first and handed her her keys. And that very simple moment of kindness was absolutely life-changing for her, because she noticed later on that night when she was talking to her husband, in that moment of receiving kindness, she felt, just for a millisecond, she felt like herself again. And so she began to notice other moments of kindness and the impact they had on her, so much so that she went on to decide that in order to live through a life that held the loss of her son, Ben, and this new normal she was trying to find her way into, she was going to focus on kindness. And so she eventually developed an organization called Ben's Bells, in which you can go to her community and sit around a table and help make beautiful bells that have messages of kindness on them. And you can't buy a bell. You gift them to you, you take them in the middle of the night and hang them around a town. So when the town wakes up the next morning, or the school wakes up the next morning, there are the beautiful bells with messages of kindness all over them. By choosing to focus on these brief glances of kindness, she built within her a sense of hope that she would find a way through this in such a way that she was bringing her better self alive. Does this make sense? Okay. One of the things that we know about happiness is that it isn't just about pleasure and positivity, it is also about meaning. And meaning is often the thing that disappears first when life hits us hard. So in the presence of death, how many of you have, when you've lost someone you love tremendously, how many of you have felt like life just didn't make sense anymore? Or in the presence of a terrible diagnosis, or the loss of a job, or your house is burned down, all your possessions are suddenly gone, or someone has betrayed you. How many have you felt like it doesn't really matter? Like it just doesn't matter anymore, right? So the meaning tends to disappear quickly in the presence of tragedy. And yet we know that meaning is crucial for us. This is the gorgeous Sydney Opera House. I love how they have architected the heart in the center of the house. That meaning is crucial to finding our way back into a heart, a willingness to live that coheres. Jeanette Mare, in tracking how kindness elevated her a little bit each day over time, and then choosing to create this organization around the theme of kindness, was actually creating a new meaning for her life, one that honored and respected her suffering and also respected that she was in a new territory, a new way of living. Ben would not live again, and yet she still was, right? So meaning is something that often is one of the ways in which we elevate happiness in dark times. It's not about glee or delight. It's about something that actually nourishes you even when your heart has been shattered. There was a gorgeous poet, Stanley Kunitz, who lost his dad, I think when he was born. His dad passed, and then his mom eventually remarried, and he had this wonderful stepfather who then died when he was 14. So 2 fathers by the time he was 14 years old, gone. And he writes a poem about childhood called The Testing Tree. And in it, he remembers being a young boy. Remember how when you were young, you would sort of stalk things? And he would pretend to be, like a quiet, force in the forest, and moving so softly that no one knew he was there, almost invisible. And then he would challenge himself against a tree, a giant tree he called the Jehovah of Acorns, right? And the inexhaustible oak. And he would put stones in his pockets and step back and then challenge himself by throwing stones against the tree. And he writes, Father, and we don't know which father he's calling out to, but Father, wherever you are, bless my good right arm. I have only 3 throws. In the haze of the afternoon, while the air flowed saffron, I played my game for keeps. When we were young, we often remember to play life for keeps. Like it matters if you finish the bicycle race first, right? It matters if you get to keep the marbles. It matters if you got that, the grade that you wanted, or the swimming sort of little plastic trophy, right? You play as if it matters, and we sometimes forget this along the journey of our lives. And yet, this capacity to hold positivity in dark times rests on our capacity to hold what matters, to actually infuse life with what matters. Michael Steger, who's a researcher at the University of Colorado on meaning, says that meaning has 3 components to it. The first is significance, which is my life matters or I matter, right? My life matters or I matter. And so Jeanette Mare, choosing to create this foundation after choosing first to focus on kindness, was reminding herself that she mattered and her life mattered. The second element of meaning is coherence. My life makes sense to me. And ironically, our lives don't make sense to us unless there is some sense of significance, of mattering to them. And the third aspect of meaning has to do with purpose, needing a plan or a goal, a direction, an intention, right? I was talking to a beloved friend this morning who lost a family member recently, and during the time of, as he was preparing to pass, chose to offer the retreat that she had organized a year before. And she said this beautiful thing, I knew that I could love and honor my father's dying, and I was on purpose in holding the retreat. I was on purpose, right? And that any one of those elements can disappear in the darkest of times, and conversely, when we choose consciously to act as if our life matters, when we choose consciously to act as if how we show up in our day matters, life starts to cohere again. And eventually over time, not right away, eventually over time, a new sense of purpose can begin to emerge. So I wanted to teach you one other sort of quick tool that you could use that both elevates hope and brings us in the direction of a greater meaning, because it takes us out of any negative sort of thought patterns or negative emotion patterns that we've gotten stuck in. So let's just do some checking in first. Has anybody in the room ever catastrophized? Has anybody in the room ever jumped to conclusions about themselves or others or life? Has anybody ever taken anything personally? Oh, we got 100% in the room. Has anybody ever max-min? Max-min is when you maximize the negative input coming your way, minimize the positive. Okay? Has anyone ever externalized? Externalize is when it's not your fault. If only you had better children, it's the ref's fault, right? Yes? Blame and shame, that can look like blame and shame. Okay? Mind reading. So mind reading looks two ways. It looks like you and I are working together and you just did something that is confusing and disturbing, and instead of me checking in with you about, so why did you do that? What was that about? I just make assumptions about who you are. That's one way. And the other way to practice mind reading is, you and I have been together for years. I shouldn't have to tell you what I want for Valentine's Day. You should know. Anybody? So all of these are negative thought habits. They're normal, they're natural. The Dalai Lama has negative thought habits. Like, they're just part of the human brain. And what we know is that in times of stress, we tend to become more rigid in our thinking. And if we are likely to take things personally or jump to conclusions or catastrophize, we are more likely to do that when we're under stress, right? When life has been harsh with us. So in order to build in these pathways toward positivity, we have to know what to do with those. In order to build in hope, we have to allow ourselves to move from these rigid thought patterns and beliefs in a more grounded but hopeful direction. And so a simple tool is to ask yourself, okay, I believe this. So let's just hear sort of a negative belief that any one of us might be holding. Pardon me? I'm going to lose my job. Right? Great. Example. Someone else.
I'm too fat.
I'm too fat. Someone else. Yes.
I believe I'm not very good at something that I really need to be good at.
Yes, I believe that I'm not very good at this, and I really do need to be good at it. Right? Anyone else? I can't rely on anyone. I can't trust anybody. Right. I'm going to die alone. Oh, you are my person. Where are you? We are going to have a drink after. Yes, I'm going to die alone. My fantasy is I'm going to die alone as a homeless person in the streets of Philadelphia. I don't know why Philadelphia. I've never lived in Philadelphia, but that's where it's going to be. I'll never find love again. I'll never be picked first. I'm not that important. I often joke that if my grandmothers had had bumper stickers, they would have read, "Life is hell, people are crap, and God hates you." Those are my people. So, here's a simple tool. All of those are catastrophizing, taking things personally, jumping to conclusions, max-minning, right? There's some combination of those, right? And what we want to avoid when life is tremendously hard, hellish, we want to avoid bringing more hell into hell. And that's how we do that. As we jump to conclusions, we take things personally. We are bringing more hell into hell. Does that make sense? So in order to build pathways toward hope, in order to feel a sense of respite, in order to create new meaning in our lives, we need to know what to do when our minds are spiraling this way. And so a simple tool is to simply write down the belief, right? I'm not good at this, and I'm never going to be good at this. I'm too fat, or I'm too thin, or I'm not smart enough. Whatever those are personalizations, by the way, my people. Whatever the catastrophe, you write it down, right? And then you just write 4 or 5 sentences on what your day is like, believing that. Like who would you be? What would happen in your day if you believed that? And then you draw a line, and in the other column, you write a different belief. And what you ask yourself is, what other story might be true? And then you write 4 or 5 sentences about what your day might be like if you actually believe the other story. So the other story could be something like, I might not be good at this yet, and yet I know how to learn. And so what would your day be like then if you believe that, right? I can't trust anybody is one story. The other column might be, there actually are a few people I deeply trust in life. Or I'm learning to trust myself. And then you write about what your day would be like. So do me a favor, just turn to someone next to you. And you don't need to share anything about your own personal beliefs or anything, but just a quick conversation about, if you asked yourself regularly what other story might be true, what good do you think might emerge in your days? So if you consciously noticed that you were going down some negative thought spiral, stopped and asked yourself what other story might be true, what good might emerge in your days? The person with the biggest eyebrows goes first. Go ahead. Wonderful. So what good might emerge in our days? Let's just hear a few ideas.
Feel lighter.
Lighter, a sense of lightness. Pardon me?
Curiosity.
Increased curiosity. A sense of greater control. Open to new opportunities. More excitement, actually. Yeah. A sense of confidence, self-esteem, self-efficacy. It just literally just stopping the negative train. Like there'd be more of that stopping, right? Yep. Trust. What else? Balance, increased self-awareness. Inner peace. Oh my God. Inner peace. Isn't that what we really want? Yes? Isn't that what we're like? Just peace, just a little bit more peace. What else? Success. Increased success? Happier, yes. Change of perspective. Empathy. We'd actually be a little nicer to the people we hang out with. Anything else? Yeah, not being so angry or frustrated or irritated or pissy with other people. Yes, that was just me, not you. I thought I heard something else over here. A sense of growth. Yeah, I'm actually growing. Okay. Everything that you've all just have described is the territory of resilience. It's the territory of post-traumatic growth. It's the territory of having something extraordinarily difficult happen and growing anyway. So here's the metaphor I'd like to invite you to hold in this question of happiness or positivity in dark times. This is a bowl that's been broken and repaired now, lined with golden lacquer. It's an art form that emerged in the 15th century in Japan called kintsugi or kintsukurai. And the story is told that a Japanese shogun by the name of Yoshimasa had a fine family heirloom break, sent the bowl to China for repairs, which was the custom at the time. And the bowl came back with these ugly metal staples holding the fractured pieces together. And he was so despondent over the loss of the beauty of the bowl that he challenged the artisans near him to come up with a finer form of repair. And one of them returned a bowl to him, having been broken, now lined in the fractured places with golden lacquer. And the art form became so popular, it became a philosophy. And the philosophy is that even as we are broken, our purpose, our intent remains intact. If you're a bowl, you still can behave as a vessel, even though you've been fractured. You can still hold things. If you're a human being, your purpose, your intent remains intact. You still matter. You still have purpose and place in life. So happiness in dark times isn't about either being in hell and getting oneself out of hell and into heaven. That's like the 8-year-old version of resilience, right? And I'm serious, that's what 8-year-olds want. They want heaven, not hell, black and white. But everyone in this room is old enough to know that that isn't quite possible. And yet what is possible is this place where we are flawed and fractured, a bit nutty, and magnificent, where we are sad, grieving, angry, frustrated, worried, terrified, and hopeful, where we live both broken and whole. Father, bless my good right arm. I have only 3 throws is really the truth of life. We don't know how long we have. We don't know when the bus is going to come. But we are on the life bus right now. And those of us who navigate life with resilience, with satisfaction, with a sense of thriving, even in the worst times, understand that it is about living into the paradox of positivity in the presence of suffering. Thank you for this conversation this evening. I hope it was useful for you. I think, Mark, you wanted to come up and have a bit of Q&A.
Thank you so much, Maria. I was actually just sitting there absorbing all the thought-provoking, amazing things you've just shared with us. Folks, we've got plenty more this evening to come. There's a few things I'm hoping you'll find interesting that I'd love to ask Maria, and I'm sure we'd love to hear your questions and make time to carry on the conversation. And I know there's something else that you were hoping to share with us as well. So much food for thought there and very inspiring. I guess the first thing that came up for me, often one of the critiques of positive psychology is this idea that we're just sort of trying to encourage positive emotions and perhaps aren't leaving space for some of the negative emotions. I think what you shared at the end there about these juxtapositions between broken and whole and so on is a lovely response to that. But obviously, you talked about a horrific loss in your life of a loved one. There's something about the healing process of grieving and experiencing negative emotions that almost feels like you're not able to experience that hope until you've at least come to terms with the sadness or the loss. What's your take on that, having been obviously a psychologist for many years and then looked through this positive psychology lens?
So there is no integration if you don't first allow yourself to feel the darkness, right? The first thing we have to do is allow ourselves to grieve or be angry or feel betrayed because we've been betrayed, right? That's reality. True hope, that model of true hope that I just briefly referenced from Jerome Groopman, who's a medical oncologist in Boston, has 3 components to it. The first is you have to face reality as it is. You have to feel what you feel, think what you think, believe what you believe. But no resilience grows out of allowing yourself to just stay there. The resilience grows in the and. So you feel what you feel, think what you think, believe what you believe, behave badly as we sometimes do, and then the other circle is we consciously move toward a slightly better future. So there are 3 important things in that. We move, meaning we take conscious action toward a slightly, meaning we don't ask ourselves to suddenly feel better 24/7. It's small increases in moving toward positivity. And a better future is defined by us. Like how I navigated the loss of my brother would look very different than perhaps how you might navigate the loss of a sibling, right? The parents I worked with in Boston at Dana-Farber who were losing children, every family had its own way of finding their way into this. Jeanette Mare founded an organization called Ben's Bells, which is now a national organization. There is no way on God's green earth it would never occur to me I'm a nice person, but that's a lot of freaking work. It's not where, you know what I mean? It's not who I am. But can I dive deeply into the poets, which is where a passion of mine lives, and bring that forward in service of myself and those I love? That I can do. Right? Mm. So it's really about feeling and honoring what we feel and think and who we are imperfectly as we navigate these storms, and then moving toward our own sense of a slightly better future.
It's the and, not the either or. It's the, yeah. Thank you. I wanted to ask about post-traumatic growth, this idea that sometimes in the face of these terrible life events that actually you might find, and this is a sort of slightly flippant example, but somebody might say in light of something along the lines of, I wouldn't wish it on anyone, but with hindsight, that cancer diagnosis was the best thing that ever happened to me. That sort of, it almost maybe reframed the way I look at my life. Could you say a bit about what's going on there with post-traumatic growth, and why sometimes people might look back on horrible times with a rather optimistic sort of narrative?
Right. So, as positive psychology the science of positive psychology began to emerge, one of the questions that was asked is, who do we look like when we are at our best in the horrible moments? And we all have role models, iconic figures we hold in mind for this incredible resilience, like Nelson Mandela, like the Dalai Lama, like Thich Nhat Hanh, Viktor Frankl, etc. We have these images, Malala Yousafzai, still with a death threat out, teaching the world about the right for girls to have education. Incredible resilience. We have these iconic figures, but when researchers began to look at thousands and thousands of data points of ordinary human beings, they discovered that most of us do well most of the time in the presence of catastrophe. Like our resilience statistics, brain trauma, loss of a child, first responders who respond to trauma, surviving war, the resilience rates are like 49 to 89%. Like most of us do pretty well. And in the presence of catastrophe, some of us actually grow. We grow, like we become larger within ourselves, more generous, more connected, more compassionate. We feel stronger within ourselves, a greater sense of appreciation of life, deepening spirituality, like all these beautiful bouquet of evidences. And what the stories that are told over and over and over again when we look at these anecdotes and studies of resilience have exactly to do with what you just articulated. I wouldn't ever wish this on anyone, and I'm astonished by this. I'm astonished by how kind the world can be. I'm astonished by how strong I feel inside. I'm astonished by the sense of opportunity I now have in life, right? So it's as if the very limit of the suffering became the catalyst or the catapult into a larger living.
So the first time I remember experiencing a kind of a traumatic experience, it was a sort of wake up and feeling, as you said, just telling something about kind of seeing more purpose in life. And the way I found myself articulating was sort of being almost forced to recognize what really mattered, and that somehow maybe I'd been living a little bit on autopilot, and actually that trauma, in my case a chronic pain incident, sort of made me recognize that there were some things that matter much more than others around relationships and so on. And it made me think, is it possible to have that sort of sense of awakening that sometimes we get in the face of dark times without having to have the dark times? Because wouldn't that be good? Because in some ways, clearly crazy, But what we really want for everyone we care about is that sense of let's just really wake up to what matters in life without having to wish the trauma on that person. So is there is what you share with us tonight to some extent, or can we look at it in reverse to sort of almost shortcut these habits so that we're better able to live well regardless of trauma?
So I have like 3 answers to that question. So the first is there do seem to be a certain subset of people, not the people I knew, but there do seem to be a certain subset of people who have a sense of the preciousness and significance of life. It seems to be genetically encoded. That's how they grow up, right? So we know that that's possible. Secondly, we know that people who've experienced post-traumatic growth and either know the actual term for it or don't know the term for it, but they know that they've grown into this integration and larger self. Once you've experienced it and you're conscious of it, you're more likely to experience it again, and you don't need the catastrophe the second time around. In other words, you're preset to grow even when it's just annoying stress, like the trains aren't on time this week, right? The third answer to that is most of us know and then forget. We know and then forget. I have spent some time with Bon monks. Bon is the indigenous religion of Tibet. It's the precursor to Buddhism in Tibet, and my ex-husband and I are quite friendly with some of the Bon monks, and they have their mala beads, right? And they're constantly doing the mala thing. And so I asked one of the monks once, how does that, literally, tell me, how does that actually help you? And he said, oh, it's all about remembering. It's all about remembering so that I forget less often what I know to be true, right?
That's really helpful. Certainly the case in my experience. Before I open up to questions from the audience, I had one other angle I wanted to take this in, which links in very much to our great passion with Action for Happiness around not just a happier me, but a happier collective, if you like. And we're intrigued, many of us involved in this, with this link between sort of personal happiness and sort of social change and making the world a happier place. And of course, we've talked a lot this evening about dark times through the lens of personal loss and personal tragedy, but many of us are deeply concerned about what you might call the sort of macro dark times, the climate change, you referred to Trump, and concerns around political developments, all kinds of, the polarization in society and so on. How much of what we've talked about this evening through a rather personal lens is applicable when we think about the dark times that we perceive outside of ourselves rather than perhaps within our relationships? And how can we maybe use some of these skills, or indeed other ones, to respond constructively to the dark times around what seems like very bleak news or distressing political circumstances or tragedies that are, away from our day-to-day life but still affect us emotionally? What's that connection between personal and social?
I think there is no separation. Essentially, in making that connection between how we care for ourselves and social good, at the biggest level, what we're talking about is doing more good, bringing less harm, right? That's what we want to do with our colleagues. It's what we want to do with the people we live with. It's what we want to do with our communities and family. We want to do less harm, more good. That's like the general principle, right? And we can become more skillful at that when we practice these micro practices, because as we elevate positivity, we know also that naturally generosity and kindness elevate. We actually become morally better human beings the happier we are. They seem to twin together. Positivity leads to kindness and generosity, which then supports more positivity and so on. So we become better human beings. We're doing less harm, more good. And does it matter, if the climate is suffering horrifically and I'm nicer to the person next to me in the laundromat, is there a direct correlation? Maybe not. However, is my kindness in that moment at the laundromat, or my laughter, or my shared sense of communion around how annoying it is to be doing one's laundry on a Saturday night, right? That sort of shared communion around that. She may be the person who actually is actively working on water, bringing water to villages that don't have water. And I've now energized and bolstered her capacity to show up and do that again the next day. And because she has laughed with me, I wake up in a better state of mind. And in my better state of mind, I'm more likely to be innovative and creative about how I might spend my energy on behalf of something larger than myself. So absolutely, these micro moments of positivity lead to a better human being, showing up as more of our better selves more often, which do have a contagion effect around us. And one of the great contagions is increased vitality, not just satisfaction, but vitality in life. We have more energy to show up in the ways that are potent and meaningful for us.
Thank you. What a wonderful answer. I'd now like to open up and hear both responses and also questions from the audience. So we have some microphones, so if you could wait until a microphone comes towards you. Who'd like to start us off? Any questions? I can't see all that well. There's
There's
a
one here.
lady down here in the front row, and then a lady with the sort of nice scarf behind, and then we'll come to another part of the room. Thank you. So start on the left over here on the front row. Thank you.
Hello. First of all, thank you very much for that, particularly the tools that you are sharing that can help us every day. I wanted to ask, I know we all say we sort of strive for happiness. Have you ever come across people who are fearful of happiness and maybe do things to jeopardize happiness because they don't know? And why is that? Is it because some of us, fear that when we get there, it won't be enough? Or is it just we don't know what to do with the feeling when we get there?
I think there are a couple of different answers to that, and maybe, Mark, you have an answer as well. One answer is that some of us are socialized from early childhood to not believe that there's value in happiness. So there's value in hard work, or there's value in suffering, and we just have, that hasn't been added into the equation. So it doesn't seem right or familiar to us, right? So it's a new territory. A second is sometimes people have grown up in systems of faith that teach if you're happy, it'll be taken away from you. And so we protect against the pain of having something taken away by not investing in it to begin with. The third is that some of us have grown up in systems where we think life is a pie, and if I have a certain amount of happiness, that means other people won't have it that much. If I have a certain amount of love, that means there's less for others. Or if they have it, then I won't have it. And that sort of scarcity mentality gets in the way. I think those are the most common.
The only thing I'd add to that, I agree with both of those, and those are perhaps the most important points, but there is something about the sort of the wording or the expression of ideas like happiness, and of course in a British culture in particular, we run up against almost like how acceptable is it to use certain phrases. And I find we very intentionally, with Action for Happiness, being quite bold with that word that's so often misconstrued and misunderstood. And yet I find that when I speak to people who are skeptical or sort of saying, oh, I'm not sure that's what I really care about, and I say, well, I don't really mind what word you use. You might talk about, contentment or a sense of inner peace or a sense of living a good life or things going well or feeling good. Actually, that sense of being in a good place emotionally and holistically is really what we're talking about. So you may not call that happiness. You might call that something else. But actually, I think when you strip away the defense mechanisms and the masks, everybody acknowledges that they like to feel good and they don't like to feel bad, and that's what they want for their loved ones. But of course, we have to bear in mind that a happy life isn't about feeling good all the time. It's about, as we've heard, dealing constructively with whatever happens. So I think there's a really delicate sort of dance around this idea of a superficial sort of happiness, and actually what we've touched on, I think, so well this evening, this sort of rather more deeper, grounded, meaningful happiness, which I think is so important. Thank you for that question. There's a lady with the scarf here. Thank you. Yes. Have you got a microphone? No.
Yes, hi. First of all, I'd really like to say a massive thank you. Because without your book, Maria, The Loss, Finding Happiness, I probably wouldn't be here today, really, because I lost my 20-year-old daughter 3 years ago, and I didn't think I'd ever be happy again. And I felt so alone in my grief because I didn't know anybody else who had lost a 20-year-old daughter, and no other books that I read came anywhere close to how you have described grief, and that I could allow myself to be happy without feeling guilty. So I want to say thank you.
Thank you for your courage. in living. Grief is a journey of extraordinary courage. The heart has been shattered, and it is in pieces. And so much can come to step on those pieces and make it even harder. And it is very, very, very brave to choose life. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much.
In the back?
Gentleman in the corner.
I'm very interested in you talking about grief this last moment. I mean, in my own family, we've had a situation where I've raised my family myself for about 20-odd years. And I was going to ask you, this is a very useful sort of kit for people to deal with grief without going to a counsellor. How do you stand on whether people should always have bereavement counselling?
Whether people should have counseling? So you're talking to a psychologist. Let's just name reality. And I am a lifer. I've been in therapy on and off 20 plus years. I probably will continue because it works for me, right? What I'm less interested in whether counseling is the thing, and much more interested in what is it that supports you in moving toward greater health and capacity. And so for many of us, it is counseling, and I absolutely recommend counseling all the time. For some of us, counseling is not the frame that serves them or nourishes them. And so then the question is, well, what might? And it can be creating new meaning. It can be support through faith. It can be meditation and mindfulness. When I started graduate school on the very, very first day of my doctoral program, the man who eventually became my academic mentor said to all of us, there are 1,000 ways to live a healthy life. And one of your jobs is to get out of your own head about your assumptions about what health looks like and allow life to teach you. So yes to counseling, and it's not the only answer. Is that helpful? Pardon? Do I think there's a time limit to bereavement counseling? Oh, darling, now you have just touched one of my pet peeves. So we in the West have internalized this myth that grief has a time and that we ought to be over it by now, or we ought to be at the next stage by now, right? In certain families or communities, that looks like 3 months, that looks like a year, like you're allowed to grieve for a year and then you're done, right? Or you're allowed 3 years, yay, but then you're done. I don't want to hear about it, right? And we internalize that. We do this to ourselves, right? Has anybody ever done that to themselves? Like, I should be over this by now? Yeah. And I much, much prefer to hold grief as a companion on the journey. Like, grief is simply with me on the journey, and some days it looks profound and like I am on my knees on the floor, and other days it looks like a sort of gentle whisper, and other days it's heart fight. It looks different, but we grieve because we loved. I get to love those I have lost the rest of my life, which means I am exposing myself to pain the rest of my life. So the time thing, I wish we could all just let go of that and honor and recognize that it is part of the journey. And if bereavement counseling holds you together for 20 years, then God, go to bereavement counseling. So, yes, I'm a little passionate about this.
Nothing had happened.
Do I think it's potentially dangerous if someone doesn't recognize that they're grieving?
The psychological makeup.
Yes, it is potentially dangerous. Yes. Because anytime we quell any aspect of reality, we quell other aspects of our capacity. So if you push down grief, if you push down anger, if you pretend that you are never those things, then you also mute all of the good in you. You sap your own energy and vitality. Eventually, you may become ill, psychologically or physically, but you certainly become dimmer, like your light dims.
Thank you for those very interesting questions. Can I see a show of hands for who else would like to ask something? Let's see, have we got any questions upstairs? I'm afraid I can't see very well upstairs. Not seeing any raised hands. Oh yes, lady on the front row. Please, can you shout out because we can't get a microphone to you?
How might you maybe help support people that kind of feel guilty for feeling happy after a traumatic experience or something that's kind of brought them down? Want to feel happy but feel guilty for wanting to feel happy?
Yeah. So this question comes up.
Can we repeat the question for those
Oh,
who
I'm
didn't
sorry.
hear it?
Yes. Good point, Mark.
So it was just, well, in fact, you may paraphrase it better than me, but I mean, what for people who have experienced grief but then want to feel happy again, but then dealing with the guilt that comes with, well, how should I feel happy in light of what's happened? Was that a fair sort of summary of what you asked? Yeah.
So it's very, very common to feel guilty when you find yourself, for example, laughing after someone has died, like weeks later you're laughing, or you've just noticed that you've enjoyed a TV show and you realize for half an hour I forgot that I was in great pain, right? And then we feel terrible about that. We feel guilty. And so, first of all, just to normalize it, that is a normal part of the process. Secondly, to recognize that the life force within us is very strong. And our longing to find a way back into life is a sign of health. And so that very guilt is actually an indicator of health. That we are in what Joan Borisenko calls the no longer and not yet. We are no longer so overcome with grief that we can't experience happiness, but we're not yet integrated into feeling that it's okay. So we're in this liminal space, this threshold time, and that's simply part of the experience of it. And the third thing that I find helpful, not right away, but eventually to remind people is that probably your loved one would want for you to be happy in some way again. And that there is a way in which to bring meaning to that happiness, significance by remembering. Like my baby brother would want me to find a way to go to Bon Jovi concerts. And short of that, Ed Sheeran, although he's a little young for me. He's very cute, though. He's so sweet with the guitar. So sweet. Isn't he? He's adorable.
You just don't get that many combined Bon Jovi and Ed Sheeran lovers, do you?
You do you, honey, I'll do me.
Okay.
Right?
Very nice.
Is that helpful? Yeah.
That's told me. And there's a hand up halfway back. Where's our microphone gone? Can we get a microphone to this lady in the middle over here? Thanks so much.
How about when you're very close to somebody who hasn't passed away because of an illness, but they've got it's not a terminal illness, but a psychological illness, like one of the really bad psychotic ones, for example, and they're just not getting better. And so part of them is lost because part of their like my sister, part of her personality is gone because she's got one of those. And I just can't accept it. And I've looked up Eckhart Tolle videos on YouTube, what's the point of mental illness, and and I just can't seem to. I do manage all, and I really resonate with your talk. It was wonderful. I think I've developed more as a person and grown, and I try and be dignified and try and accept it. But I still can't really accept it, and there's a lot of anger and grief and at that loss. But she hasn't passed away. She's still with us, but she's just not going to get better. Well, it's been 30 years since she got it. How to help with? How can you advise with that?
To help you accept it?
Yeah.
Is that really what you're looking for?
I think so, and to sort of yes, and to try to become happier, to accept it, and to try to I don't know, not feel so lost and sad and angry?
Yeah. It's a very difficult question because the living with a chronic illness, whether it's physical or psychological, the constant presence of that and the loss of the future as it should have been, the loss of your sister's future as it should have been, it's like a daily dose of toxins, right? And so in the presence of a daily dose of toxins, it's really hard to experience this fully. It's hard. And it's not possible until you really accept it. And I can only speak personally for what's worked for me and some of the clients I've worked with, which is a much more sort of Dalai Lama-like approach, which is allowing yourself to deeply feel how angry and upset, and stop looking for the solutions and start just allowing the depth of despair. Own it, name it, allow it to be. Because paradoxically, when you allow the fullness of the despair to appear, that is when these other possibilities actually can take root. But if you're fighting it in any way, it's very hard to get to the other side. Yes.
We've got time, I think, for just one more question because I wanted to leave time for another reflection you wanted to share.
So the gentleman in the back there?
Gentleman there.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Do you have any suggestions for sort of recovering from burnout? So I went through a very difficult business situation where my business partner basically destroyed a company that I'd put a lot of work into, and it was like a divorce, so kind of grieving and coming out the other side of that, but I'm feeling I don't have the same sort of passion and enthusiasm that I did have for my work before, and I want to get that back because I still really care about the work that we were doing, but that's kind of been destroyed, so I want to try and find that again.
Yes. So the antidote to burnout is in some way what we've talked about today. These can be helpful, these positivity, micro-positivity practices. The first level of really healing from burnout, though, is really what we call radical self-care. Because, one element of burnout is absolute fatigue and exhaustion. And a second element is world weariness, like we just are tired of the world, like we're tired of the universe. Does that sound resonant? Tired of the business kind of world. And then the third element often is a kind of depression that comes, with the world weariness and the fatigue. And so really practicing self-care. Now, traditional models of self-care are what? Exercise, sleep hygiene, eat well, and meditate, right? In the 80s, it was eat well, sleep well, and exercise. By 90s, we added meditate or mindfulness, right? Yay! You can do all of those and still be burnt out. Like you're still, don't want to wake up in the morning or don't want to go to work. So really we need to add to that some other factors. And one of the other factors we need to add is choosing life, saying yes to life, tracking your passion. Okay, that you're exhausted from that, but what do you love? Who was I talking to? Ian. I was talking to Ian, Manchester City versus Man U. Like, who do you love? Right? Is it Ed Sheeran versus Bon Jovi? Literally, track what you love and go there. Even if it's a small passion, like making chocolate balls. Like, track what you love, number one. Number two, learn to say absolutely no to anything that you know is going to drain your energy. You don't need more energy drainers when you're burned out. So choose life. Say no to anything that drains you. The third is respect for your body. Burnout is not just a psychological state. It becomes a physical state. So what do you need to do to bring vitality into your body? That's just sort of a quick response.
Thank you.
And I think hopefully also very helpful for the majority of us, whether we're facing severe burnout or not, because I think what you've just shared is a very wise sort of approach to living generally. I feel we could carry on this conversation all evening, and I know Maria will be very happy to stay around for a little while and carry on conversations and so on. But I want to respect those of you who've got to get away as promised at 8:30. And I know, Maria, you wanted to share sort of one final thought with us, and I've got a couple of little announcements to make at the end. So over to you.
So just a couple of weeks ago in my news feed, this showed up. Did you guys see this? The BBC had an article on a whiteboard that someone had put in her, I think her elderly mom's room. Her mom was in a home for dementia or Alzheimer's. And the reporter just posted this, and then there was a story about dementia. And the post went viral, like crazy viral around the world. You're okay. Everyone's fine. You're not moving. No one else is moving. Keep drinking. It will help your memory. And it reminded me of a beautiful story that I wanted to leave you with. In 2001, when we experienced 9/11 in the United States, that day, air travel to the United States was completely blocked. And so planes that were en route to the United States had to go somewhere else. And 36 of them were sent to Gandor, which is a small town in Newfoundland of 5,000 people. Now, Gandor's an unusual town because back in the 1950s, when air travel, there wasn't enough fuel capacity in airplanes to cross the Atlantic without refueling. Everybody used to go to Gandor, refuel, and then come across the pond. And so Gandor, this tiny town, has a giant airport. So air traffic controllers diverted 36 planes from around the world to Gandor, carrying over 7,000 passengers, so more than the size of the entire town. They had no idea how long they would be there. There were something like 20 different languages that were spoken. 5 dogs, 2 cats, and 2 rare bonobo monkeys were on those planes.
Wow.
Yeah. There were people of every religion on those planes. And the town had to mobilize immediately and feed these people and keep them safe until the airspace opened up again. And so for 5 days and 5 nights, 5,000 people in the town of Gandor fed 7,000 strangers and clothed them. And they took care of the monkeys, one of whom was pregnant, and the cats and the dogs. And on the second day, the mayor of Gandor brought everyone, I think it was to the giant ice rink, because that could fit most of them, and made them all official Newfoundlanders, which means you have to drink this disgusting beer drink, and you have to kiss a cod, a fish. And then you have to sing a Newfie song. Well, the story has become a Broadway play. It's called Come From Away. And one of the refrains of the opening song is, we have a candle in the window, and the candle is always lit. And this kind of thing is that. It's lighting a candle in the window for a loved one with dementia, which is one of the great sufferings of men and women of our generation, is that we have elders we love whose memories are fading. And these positive psychology, these micro practices are that as well. They are candles in our window, lighting that which is good within us, reminding us of the light that is always possible, enabling us to gather our stones and send off those 3 good throws. So I wanted to thank BBC for this story. I wanted to thank you, each of you, for everything you have done and are doing to hold your own candle, your flame alive. Because you never know when you're going to need to feed a couple of bonobo monkeys and strangers. And life, as harsh as it is, these horrible, surprising, terrible things that happen, it is also surprisingly, miraculously wondrous in bringing us the chance to be our better selves. Thank you so much for your time and your attention tonight.